I think most of us have misunderstood the sovereignty of God. I'm Lisa DeLay, and I want to talk to you about God's sovereignty, spiritual formation, and the things of God. I wanted to go on from my last video about David Bentley Hart and this idea about who God is and how we have often misunderstood or misrepresented or just come to very illogical conclusions about God. Many of us in the United States and in the West generally have been heavily influenced by Presbyterianism. The Westminster Confession is where many of our traditions come from. In Calvinist traditions and Reformed traditions, we tend to think of God's sovereignty in one specific way. And so what is that way? Once you know it more fully, it might become awfully repugnant and illogical. I'm going to explain. Calvinists understand sovereignty as God's absolute meticulous control and active ordination of all events. It's not that much different from the determinism of materialists. And I think this is what flies in the face for thinkers and scholars like David Bentley Hart, whose incredibly brilliant mind has been able to contend with this sort of errant idea of God. It's a very Western idea, but some of the original ideas about God that come from Jesus, Jewish tradition, and Eastern tradition really vary from what we've come up with and resulted in here in the United States and other places in the West. So this idea that's a Calvinist idea of sovereignty means that all present, past, and future actions, sin, salvation, ensures God's will and is never frustrated. This divine decree covers all creation, making God the ultimate cause behind all things. In some ways, that makes sense. But in other ways, how it plays out about this determinism that is part of this idea are really flawed and even morally repugnant. So here are some key aspects of the Calvinist view of sovereignty. Meticulous providence. God doesn't just oversee, God actively governs, kind of like a puppeteer, every detail of life, from natural events to inanimate objects and even human decisions. You're not free. You're just a puppet that God manipulates, but also condemned to hell. It's a strange conundrum because if you're determined to do something, then certain people are determined for hell and certain people are determined for heaven. That is a really repugnant view of a good God. This idea of sovereignty doesn't blanket over that moral deficit. Divine determinism is another aspect of Calvinist thought. They believe that God has decreed all that will come to pass, meaning human wills are determined by this divine plan rather than acting independently. There are no free agents here. And one of the things that we hear in the Gospels is how we can come to freedom and liberation. This flies in the face of all that we hear in the Gospels. Another aspect is no chance. Events are not left to fortune or luck or fortuitous circumstances or serendipity. They're all deliberate acts of God. So even the most horrible things like child rape, that's determined by God. Isn't he great? And I also should mention, he's a he. God is a he with this, very male-dominated, male-centric and patriarchal kind of influences here. So it's not an accident that God is so violent. 98% of all violent crimes are committed by males. And so this male God does a lot of his own crime committing as well. Sovereignty and salvation is called unconditional election in Calvinist viewpoints. God alone chooses who will be saved on God's will and not merit or human choice. Inclusion of evil. Really strangely, in this concept, according to this view, God's sovereignty extends to permitting and ordaining even sinful, even evil acts. Yet God remains holy and righteous in doing so, somehow. We know that that doesn't play out in real life with us. If we do evil acts, if we commit sinful acts or force other people to do so, we are not morally off the hook in any way. Why would God be off the hook? Because of sovereignty, this magical thinking? I don't think so. Compatibility and responsibility. While God ordains all things, Calvinists hold that this does not negate human responsibility. Weird, because you're kind of trapped. Rather than human agency works within the divine plan. This doctrine is central to Reformed theology and is famously summarized in the TULIP acronym. particularly through total depravity and unconditional election. Curiously, God is seen as sovereign, and this quality in itself gives God the option to do all sorts of things that make God morally inferior, even to some of us, and even monstrous. But there is no ontological paradox here. It's just a category mistake. Such understandings do not follow in logical ways. And like a Lego God we construct from bits of the Bible that we just piece together to fashion what we'd like, this is done to satisfy our agenda or this enduring misunderstanding of what God's like. But for grown or educated adults, I think it's quite weird to have such a crude and juvenile sense of God in this way. But what do you think? Does this way of seeing God make sense to you? Does it make you uncomfortable? I'm going to go on to talk more about David Bentley Hart and another way of seeing God in a minute, but I hope that you will subscribe, you'll like the video, maybe share it with others, and you'll get alerts to my live events coming and ability to comment when you subscribe. Thank you for listening.